So, picture this. It's the summer of 1777, and the American Revolution is, well, it's hanging by a thread. The British have cooked up this massive plan to finally crush the rebellion. But the entire fate of that plan, and maybe the whole war, isn't going to be decided in some big city. Nope. It's going to happen in a remote Vermont valley, in what one German soldier grimly called the dismal place of Bennington. Let's break down this absolutely critical but often overlooked turning point.
Okay, so here was the big idea, the master stroke. British General John Burgoyne was going to drive his army south from Canada, right down that classic invasion route of Lake Champlain and the Hudson River. The plan was for him to meet up near Albany with two other British armies, one marching east and the main force under Sir William Howe coming north from New York City. The goal? A giant pincer movement to slice New England clean off from the other colonies. The idea was to isolate and just strangle the heart of the revolution.
On paper, it looked brilliant, but in reality, it was a complete and utter logistical nightmare. I mean, after Burgoyne easily took Fort Ticonderoga, his army just bogged down. It took them an agonizing 21 days to cover just 23 miles of dense wilderness. You see, the Americans were blocking roads and destroying bridges, but Burgoyne's real enemy, it was his own supply line. He just didn't have enough horses or carts to keep his massive army fed and on the move. So in this explainer, we're going to see how that massive logistical failure led to a really desperate gamble. We'll meet the German force that was sent to raid Vermont for supplies and the defiant American militia that rose up to stop them. We're going to break down the brutal battle itself, its crazy last-minute reversal, and finally we'll see exactly how this clash became the crucial prelude to the war's biggest turning point at Saratoga. So this is the key thing to understand. Burgoyne's army is grinding to a halt, right in the middle of enemy territory. And an army that can't move and can't eat? Well, that's an army that's already halfway to losing. He was facing a crisis, a big one, and it was going to require a really drastic solution.
I mean, this slide really drives home just how dire things were for Burgoyne. He was supposed to have 500 carts. He had less than 180, and a lot of those were just slapped together with green wood that fell apart on the terrible roads. He was short on horses, stuck in mud from constant rain, and could barely scrape together a single day's worth of food at a time. This level of desperation is what forced him to okay a super high-risk raid deep into the Vermont countryside, a place he'd heard was full of horses, cattle, and supplies for the taking.
And to lead this critical mission, Burgoyne didn't send his own British regulars. Instead, he put together this diverse, kind of motley crew of about 700 men. You had German dragoons, light infantry, American loyalists, Canadians, and even Native American warriors. Their mission was this really complex thing, part foraging party, part recruiting drive, and part military diversion. And the man leading this expedition was Lieutenant Colonel Friedrich Baum. He was a total professional, a real by-the-book soldier. But he was completely out of his element. He had absolutely zero experience fighting in the American wilderness. And, this is huge, he spoke not a single word of English. He was completely dependent on translators to understand what was going on, both with the terrain and the people. In this slide, this gives us such a cool peek into the German mindset. For guys like Surgeon Julius Wasmus, who kept this incredible journal, America was like another planet. They were totally fascinated, and frankly, terrified by the strange animals, the giant forests, the clouds of biting insects, everything. These were professional soldiers a long, long way from home, marching into a type of warfare they just could not comprehend. So as Baum's raiders are marching east, the alarm bells start ringing, and the man who rises to meet this threat was a true American original, John Stark. He was a hero from the French and Indian War and the Battle of Bunker Hill. But man, he was also proud, difficult, and seriously cantankerous.
Stark had actually quit the Continental Army. He was so disgusted after being passed over for a promotion. So when New Hampshire came begging him to lead their militia and defend Vermont, he agreed, but with one massive condition. He would not take orders from the Continental Congress. His command was his own. And it was that fierce, defiant streak that made thousands of frontiersmen flock to him. They trusted Stark, not some general hundreds of miles away.
So this sets up just a fascinating clash of military cultures, right? On one side, you've got Baum, the European professional, leading a disciplined force, but totally lost in the terrain and stuck following a rigid set of orders. And on the other side, you've got Stark, the American frontiersman, leading an independent and kinda unruly militia. But, and this is key, they were defending their own homes, and he had total freedom to make up his strategy on the fly. As the two forces finally closed in on each other near Bennington, Stark gathered his men, and, pointing towards the enemy, he delivered this absolutely legendary line that just perfectly captured the personal, all-or-nothing stakes of this fight. This wasn't about kings or empires. This was about their homes, their families, and their lives. After a full day of torrential rain kept the armies apart on August 15th, the next morning broke sunny and clear. Now, Baum had used that delay to dig in and set up a bunch of defensive positions. Stark, though, he had zero intention of just charging straight ahead. He had a much sneakier plan in mind. All right, let's take a look at the battlefield. Baum picked what looked like a really strong position on this hill overlooking the river. But look closely. See how his forces are all broken up into these small, isolated pockets? He's got his main German force up on the hill, a loyalist fort across the river, and other little groups scattered around. This separation, well, that turned out to be his fatal mistake. It made it impossible for his units to help each other out. Stark's plan was just brilliant. So he sent two large groups on these wide flanking marches way out through the woods to completely circle around and attack the main German position from the rear. At the same time, a third group would hit the loyalists on the flank. Stark himself would wait with the main force, and only when he heard the gunfire from all sides, the signal that the trap was sprung, would he lead the final frontal attack right into the chaos. And this quote, wow, it's such a raw example of how personal this fight was. This wasn't just a battle between countries, it was a civil war. Loyalist commander John Peters, already wounded, actually recognized the Patriot captain who had just run him through with a bayonet. It was an old schoolmate, his wife's cousin. Neighbors and family were literally killing each other in those woods. The battle, when it finally kicked off, was ferocious. John Stark himself said it was the hottest fight he'd ever been in, describing it as a continual clap of thunder. The Americans, using the woods for cover, just picked off the defenders. And Stark's pincer movement? It worked perfectly. The isolated enemy positions were hit from all sides at once, and since they couldn't help each other, they were just overwhelmed one by one. So with his outer defenses gone, Baum's main position was totally surrounded, and pretty soon the Germans ran out of ammunition. In one final desperate act of soldierly pride, Baum ordered his men to sling their muskets and led them in a downhill charge, trying to hat their way out with these huge, heavy dragoon swords. It was completely futile, just a bloody mess. Baum was mortally wounded, and what was left of his troops were either killed, captured, or they scattered into the woods. The battle seemed to be over. An incredible American victory. The militia were scattered everywhere, tending to the wounded, grabbing prisoners, looting the battlefield. But then, they heard a new sound. Drums and cannon fire. A relief column of over 600 fresh German troops was just arriving on the scene. You see, this second German commander, Breimann, had been sent out the day before, but his march was just agonizingly slow. He got hit by the same rain and mud, but this guy was also a real stickler for discipline, repeatedly stopping his exhausted men to make sure their ranks were in perfect formation. He was moving at a snail's pace, less than a mile an hour. By the time he got anywhere near the battlefield, Baum's force was already gone.
And all of a sudden, the whole tide of the battle turned. Bremen's fresh, disciplined grenadiers slammed into Stark's tired, disorganized, and frankly celebrating militia. The Americans were low on ammo and totally caught by surprise. They started falling back. What had just been a stunning victory was suddenly on the verge of becoming a catastrophic defeat.
But the day had one more twist left, and the outcome of this second, desperate fight would have consequences that rippled far beyond this little Vermont valley. It would set the stage for the single most important American victory of the entire war.
Just as Stark's line was about to completely break, Seth Warner's regiment of Green Mountain Boys showed up. These guys were fresh, they were disciplined Continental soldiers, and their arrival rallied the militia. Together, they stopped Breimann's attack and eventually forced his column into a full retreat. For Burgoyne, the twin defeats were a complete catastrophe. He lost nearly 1,000 of his best soldiers, his army was still starving, but now his flank was totally exposed, and his crucial Loyalist and Native American allies, seeing this disaster, just started melting away.
And so here's the bottom line. The victory at Bennington was so much more than just a morale boost. It absolutely crippled Burgoyne's army. It robbed him of men, supplies, and mobility. And it led directly to his surrender at Saratoga just 2 months later, a victory that finally convinced France to enter the war on America's side. It really makes you wonder, right? How did this chaotic fight, led by an outcast general in some dismal place, become the critical domino that had to fall to make American independence a reality?